Hi everyone. Purpose of this video is to kind of set the stage for you to read A Black Theology of Liberation. And I wanted you to watch this video before you read the book, or even watch some of the other videos, because I think are some terms that we need to come to an understanding of in order to understand what Cone is saying. Otherwise, I think there's just some things that can kind of get in the way of really listening or hearing what Cone is saying. This doesn't mean that you have to agree, but I want you to at least be able to give Cone the right hearing as to what he is saying and what he is not saying. And so it's important for us to, I think, set some philosophical foundations, some of the words he's using and what they mean. Now, as a part of this course, you've hopefully seen that we've been kind of moving from a certain way of thinking about theology that starts with the universal. So we think about Platonic stuff we did way back when, and then Augustine, there's a sense in which there are these realities that exist. And so the universal is more important than the particular. It doesn't mean that the particular is a bad thing, but it's always this kind of play between universality and particularity. And in ancient patristic theology, the emphasis is upon the universal, truth, those types of things. As we move through the history of Christianity, we move from this kind of emphasis upon the universal to this focus on particularity. And so we see this especially in the 20th century, liberation theology, and then here with Black theology, feminist theology. I mean, all these kind of different forms or ways of kind of thinking about theological reflection are going to begin to think about the particular more so than the universality. It doesn't, and again, it's not like you pick one or the other. It's a question of kind of which one leads or which one gets emphasized. So when we talk about particularity, it's a recognition that our understanding of the world comes out of our own kind of particular situation. So what you're getting in Black theology is Cone is asking the question about the Black experience. Now, what does he mean by Black? He is referring to the particularity of the African American experience. So again, there's a difference between Africans, African Americans, in recognizing that he is addressing the Black experience of the African American experience, specifically referring to slavery and what has been the impact of slavery upon American culture and American society. Now, I realize right now this is all really controversial stuff. So politically, culturally, this conversation is happening. People are banning books, and woke is a bad word, and critical race theory is kind of the boogeyman, and everybody's upset about it or not upset about it or whatever. What I want to do for this course, though, is try to help you kind of get past the politically charged stuff and think about what it is that some of these things are trying to get at. So what is critical race theory or critical theory trying to talk about? So I want you to think about it this way. It comes back to that question about where does human identity come from? Is human identity something that comes from within us and then we form and shape culture? Or is our identity shaped and formed by culture itself? And so the systems we create and so on, are they a reflection of us? Do they impact us? Do they shape us? And I think the answer is both and. We create culture, but then culture acts like a feedback loop, and it shapes and forms us in ways we're not aware of, or in ways that we don't even really think about. And so what Black theology is wanting us to think about is what has been the impact of slavery and racism and Jim Crow and all of that upon American culture. And when you stop and think about the fact that it's only been since the 1960s civil rights movement, that's not that long ago, where African Americans are given the same rights as everyone else. And so when we think about it in that kind of time frame, we realize this has been something that has impacted our American culture, our society, and it can't help but become baked into some of the systems we create. The point about critical race theory or critical theory is to actually ask questions about justice and what parts of our culture have baked into it certain racial assumptions, gender assumptions, and you can make others that we're just not aware of. And that we need to become aware of these things in order to create a society that is more free. And so what Cohn does is he's saying, as a Christian, as a theologian, he's asking the question, like, well, how does Christianity speak to the African American experience? And how do we understand that how do we understand who God is through the African American experience? That is his focal point. And so as you read the book, what you'll see is he wants to start with biblical foundations, the Exodus, revelation of God in Jesus Christ, the crucifixion. But for him, the theological task is about liberation. And Christianity is about liberating us. It's about freedom. And so it's about freedom from oppression and freedom from racism. And that we all, if we call ourselves a Christian, we participate in that. It's important then to recognize how he's using some terms. Number one, he's going to refer to whiteness or white theology. And it's easy for us, and it's understandable that I think some of us who are white might think, okay, he's talking about white people or white skin. And that's not what he's talking about. Whiteness for Cohn becomes a cultural category. Blackness becomes a cultural category. It becomes a lens through which we kind of think about things. And whiteness becomes about abstraction, and blackness becomes about particularity. So think about it this way. If somebody says Black Lives Matter, some people might say all lives matter, right? And all lives matter is universality. Black Lives Matter is saying, okay, these particular lives matter. Now, what's interesting about it is when you say Black Lives Matter, you are implying all lives matter. You're kind of saying Black Lives Matter too. In other words, Black Lives Matter should matter as much as other people's lives. And then when people respond by going to, well, all lives matter, it can almost be a negation of that by going to the universal. Okay, now I hope this makes sense. So what for Cohn, whiteness is about universality and abstraction. We want to take God, so white theology becomes about believing in a God who is abstract and separate, and therefore you don't have to tend to things like racism or oppression or slavery or so on. It's about, again, believing in Jesus Christ, that when we die our soul can go to heaven. That's as abstract as it would get. Where really then what does the gospel have to say about any of these kind of cultural issues? And what Cohn is arguing is that Christianity is about the incarnation of God into this world, into particularity. And therefore, God does care. And so God is at work in history, bringing freedom and freeing people from oppression. So, number one, it's important to recognize that when he talks about whiteness, he's not referring to our skin color. He's referring to whiteness as an abstract category. Or maleness. So for example, myself as a white male, there are many ways in which this Western American culture has been set up for me, that my whiteness and maleness provide a way for me to move through things much easier, right, than someone who's an African American woman or a Latina woman or anything like that. Now, again, he's not saying that my white skin is bad. Not saying that being a male is bad. It's asking questions about culture and the hidden things within kind of the cultural constructs and structures that we create that can cause problems. And so, again, some of the things he talks about in this book are very controversial, and you're going to be, I've had students be upset about it. But I think when you recognize what he's doing and what he's trying to say, and when we're able to see white and black as these cultural categories, these ideological categories, and he would argue theological categories, we're able to recognize what it is that he's doing through this book. And again, why have you read this book? Part of it is trying to help you recognize the different ways in which theology has been done. So we've moved all through, like from Augustine to Julian and so on. And now we're living at a time when you have liberation theology, you have black theology, you have, there's even a thing called queer theology that focuses on how does the gospel speak to the LGBT community. There's all kinds of theologies that are being born out of an emphasis upon particularity. Again, some people may have disagreements about some of these things, and that's fine. What I want you to recognize, though, is what it is these theologies are doing and saying. They're asking questions about what does the gospel mean for me and my experience of the world, or this particular community's experience of the world. Is it easy for these things to become too ideological and too political? Of course. Is it possible that these liberation theologies can then, in of themselves, become forms of oppression? Of course. But that's not what Cone is trying to do and say. He's trying to help us wrestle with the meaning of the gospel and doing theology in the context of the African American experience. So that's what I want you to focus on as you read this book. I ask you to read the book out of a spirit of generosity, which doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but at least listen and hear what it is that the author is doing. So that then, at the end, you can kind of make an assessment of, well, these are the things I agree with, these are the things that I disagree with. I just want to make sure that Cone and black theology gets a fair listen, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, you're going to read the book, and I got questions for you to answer. And if you have any questions, or you're still a little unsettled with some of the things that are being said, please feel free to send me an email or ask questions, and I will be happy to kind of help you make sense of it.